You're listening to Speaking Of by WFSU Public Media. Florida is moving toward a bear hunt in December, following a vote from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. The plans have been controversial to say the least. We hear from a slate of voices, including FWC Chief Conservation Officer George Warthen, Franklin County Sheriff Tony Smith, Katrina Shadix with Bear Warriors United, and WFSU's Margie Menzel, who's done extensive reporting on the issue.
Hi, I'm Gina Jordan, Morning Edition host at WFSU. Today, we are speaking of Florida's approval of a bear hunt.
I recognize this is a tough thing to talk about, and it's hard.
The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission voted 4-1 at its May meeting to move forward with the state's first bear hunt in a decade. The final decision will be made in August. 170 people spoke during public comment at the meeting, most of them against, and many referred to the last bear hunt in 2015.
Many of us were there. There were a lot of cubs in the back of trucks. 40% of those bears were lactating females, so the rules were not followed. And we had weigh stations, which is how we found these things out.
We got it.
Thank you.
We got it.
Okay,
Thank you.
so I'm saying in 23 days it would be 3,680 bears at that pace.
Thank you. It's hard. There's a lot of emotions about it. But emotions don't drive wildlife policy. Science does. We've got the North American Model of Conservation. This organization, this agency has been a tower of the North American Model of Conservation. It's time to have a bear hunt. We can argue about methods, we can argue about numbers, et cetera, but bear is a game species.
We just heard from Jamie Dos Santos and then Travis Thompson. They spoke during public comment at the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission meeting in May. WFSU sent out a survey last month asking our audience to weigh in on the anticipated bear hunt. 717 people took the survey, and nearly three-quarters of respondents said the proposal makes them feel sad or angry. I'm joined by WFSU reporter Margie Menzel. Margie, you have done extensive reporting on this. Tell us what the commission has decided and why.
Hi, Gina. The FWC, as it's known, has created a proposal for a bear hunt. Wildlife managers say the hunt is a tool for managing the black bear population and for keeping the bears from interacting with people. Opponents say there are ways to solve these problems that don't involve killing bears, such as keeping trash cans secured. They say black bears are shy and primarily vegetarian. But an 89-year-old Collier County man and his dog were killed in May. That was Florida's first recorded fatal bear attack. According to the News Service of Florida, the state has recorded 42 incidents since the 1970s of wild bears making physical contact with people.
Yeah, so the FWC, assuming the commission gives final approval at the August meeting, there will be a bear hunt this year from December 6th through the 28th. Then what happens?
After that, annual hunts could be held sometime between October 1st and December 31st.
Okay, so I want to go back. Florida had a bear hunt in 2015, and it was abruptly halted.
Yeah, it was halted because bears were being killed so quickly. The state had a quota of 320 bears to be killed over the course of a week. But 304 bears were killed in the first 2 days. So a third day would have resulted in many more bears being killed than the state had planned for. So the FWC says the rules for the hunt being drawn up now will ensure that that kind of situation doesn't happen this year. Here's the FWC's Chief Conservation Officer, George Warthen, explaining that at their May meeting.
The main difference in 2015 and what we're bringing you today is changes that reflect what we've heard from the public on if there was another hunt, if you're discussing another hunt, what those changes would be. And so I would frame those as modernizations of a hunt. Some of the core tenets that we propose to you today that change are a very specific number of quota, number of tags. We kind of colloquially will call them a hard tag because that's actually what people can visualize. And so rather than having a hunt that allowed as many hunters as they wanted to participate and then ending when you reach a quota, this would only allow a quota to have the number of hunters participating for the number of allocated tags.
Okay, so this issue of human and bear interactions keeps coming up as one of the reasons to have an annual bear hunt. We have had bear sightings recently in Tallahassee. These bears are showing up in neighborhoods very close to business areas. It's happening more as more wooded areas are going away for development. So let's look at Florida's black bear population. How many of these animals live in Florida, and how is that number determined?
Well, the state estimates just over 4,000 bears statewide. They get that figure by building hair corrals and adding something tasty like honey. These corrals collect tufts of hair when the bears come to investigate. The FWC says the Florida black bear has come back from numbering just a few hundred decades ago. Here's Rodney Barreto, the chairman of the FWC, questioning George Warthen and Morgan Richardson, the FWC's director of hunting and game management.
Would you agree with the statement that the resurgence in the bear population in Florida is a win for conservationists and it's a win for all Floridians? Would that be a fair statement?
I hope we all agree that a rise. Can I hear you again? That yes, increasing populations or healthy populations of bears are.
That's correct.
What we're all looking for here.
Right. Go ahead, Morgan.
Chairman, one of the things that I would emphasize is this very conservative, highly regulated hunt that we're proposing would not result in fewer bears.
Right.
So we would still, if we hunted in 2025 and 2026, we would likely have more bears in 2026.
So I view Florida as a leader amongst all other states. You know, and typically people are all looking at Florida. What's Florida doing? But then I look at the map that you threw up earlier, and Florida's the only one of maybe only 3 states that doesn't have a bear hunt. So how does all the other states have it right, and we don't have it right? Can you walk me through that?
Well, I think it was a good decision in '94 to close the hunt.
Okay.
Because we wanted to see bears recover in the state. And by 2015, bear numbers and distribution across the state really had dramatically recovered.
Florida's bear population is really kind of small compared to states like Alaska and California. But Franklin County Sheriff A.J. Tony Smith has been pretty vocal about the interactions between bears and residents of his county.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I love the bears. I don't want to see bears killed, but bears cannot live in the same area where people are living. And I think what's happened in our community, 90% belongs to the state and the feds. The other 5 or 10% people live along the coast, and the bears they've been born there and they've grown up there, and now they stay there. And that's the problem. It's not the bears are coming from the forest down here. It's the ones that are growing up here. And so those are the ones that need to be relocated, and something needs to happen. So, you know, if government, FWC decides it wants to have a hunt, as long as it's done properly, I don't see a problem with it.
And Margie, to his point, other states also have bear hunts. So how does what Florida is planning compare to them?
Gina, I asked Catherine Saylor of Defenders of Wildlife about that. She works with the FWC on other issues and attended all the bear hunt hearings.
This proposal kind of takes some of the worst parts of all other southern states and puts it into a single proposal.
Saylor's job is focused on the southeast U.S. She says Texas and Alabama don't have bear hunts, and Louisiana's harvest is 10 per year.
For places like Louisiana, it's still hunt only, meaning still hunt means you can't run after them with dogs and chase a bear down.
You have to be standing there with your gun, and if you don't hit it before it gets away, tough on you. Okay.
That's right. Yep.
Saylor says that is very unlike Florida's proposal, which includes using dogs for the hunt.
Baiting on private lands and a statewide hunt that's at least 21 days long. They give themselves room to schedule the hunt anywhere between October 1st and December 31st in additional years, going forward after the 2025 hunt. So they've given themselves a lot of breath to be able to do this, again, what I call wide open, all methods, dogs, baiting, all the things for a long period of time.
And so all the things includes bow hunting. Now, opponents say that causes the animal to, excuse me for being graphic here, bleed out and that can take a long time. That's what we heard from the FWC's Morgan Richardson as he was being questioned by FWC board member Sonia Rude.
Folks certainly have a right to their opinion, but it is an effective and efficient method for harvest. Generally, bears are shot with one arrow, go a short distance, and are recovered by the hunter.
So it's not a slow death?
Ma'am?
It's not a slow death?
No, not in my opinion. It's usually not immediate, but you know, I'm sure that there are many people here, and we heard this during public meetings. This is one of the things that people who are opposed to bear hunting are most opposed to is archery hunting.
That's true. We have heard from a number of people who have concerns about the specifics of this upcoming hunt.
Right. Like Susan Cerulean. Susan is an author and activist who describes herself as speaking out for the wild things and places of Florida.
Killing bears through recreational or trophy hunting is not effective as a management tool, but it's also morally unacceptable.
Cerulean worked at the FWC decades ago, but she wasn't involved with bear management. She notes that Florida's rapid development has squeezed bears into smaller habitats.
And you can't just say, oh, well, they'll find another place. It doesn't work that way, although that is not the way we act. The other problem, besides just sheer loss of habitat, is the fragmentation of habitat. And when bears and squirrels and raccoons and possums try to cross a new road, like the road between Tallahassee and Crawfordville that's just been widened, we see many more roadkills. We see turtles, we see gopher turtles, we see snakes, we see foxes, because they're moving from a place that they know in their being that is part of their home range. And bears have a huge home range. So they can't just live in a box that we define by our signs because they don't read signs.
Okay, Margie, you have found that people who are opposed to the bear hunt are promoting ways to keep bears from being killed because they're getting too close to people.
Well, exactly, Gina. Bears need food, and as the woods are being cut down, bears can wander into neighborhoods that have trash cans with uneaten food that's easy for them to access. I talked about that with Katrina Shadix, who is with the nonprofit Bear Warriors United. Her group began in 2015 when an FWC employee invited her on a ride-along to a neighborhood where two bears were getting into the garbage and scaring elderly residents. The employee asked Shadix to help retrofit the containers with straps so the bears couldn't get into them.
The residents are very scared, thinking the bears will knock them over and they'll break a leg. And she said, if you help us secure those trash cans, we don't have to kill those two bears. So I called her in 3 days. I said, we have 60 people ready to volunteer. She goes, that's amazing, but I have bad news. The FWC is not going to pay for the bear straps. And I said, just give me a minute. And it took about 2 days. I did my first GoFundMe, raised over $2,000.
Shadix says the group has mailed out more than 28,000 straps free to Floridians.
Yeah, that's a great way to cut down on those interactions. But, I mean, ultimately, this year's hunt is expected to go forward, and a lot of people support it.
That's absolutely true, Gina. And some have mixed feelings about it, like Joe Guthrie. He's a research biologist at Florida's Archbold Station, and he's an expert on apex predators, which bears are. That means nothing is hunting them for food. Guthrie says he's a lifelong hunter, but not of bears.
I'm encouraged that it seems like there will be a limited number of permits issued, because that means there will be a limited number of legal hunters out there that the agencies have to keep track of and enforce the rules for. Seems likely there will be some opportunists and poachers. That's always been the case. That will always be the case, that we'll have to fight as hard as we can against them. I mean, we need to make sure that the agencies, especially FWC, has the resources to enforce the laws.
Gina, Joe Guthrie sees the black bear as a symbol of conservation.
There is some risk in beginning to manage the black bear as a game animal, muddying that a little bit, of removing, knocking it down a peg in terms of how of its symbolic importance to conservation. I don't know how that works. I don't know if the effort to accomplish conservation will have the same juice. If one of its chief symbols becomes managed more as a game animal.
Margie, as I understand it, FWC staff recommended against having a bear hunt. What can you tell us about why they made that recommendation and why the commission went against it?
So I asked the FWC's George Warthen about that. He helped craft the proposal for this year's bear hunt, and he says there's a lot of misinformation regarding what the FWC staff said in their recommendation.
And that really stems from how presentations happen in front of the commission. And so if we rewind to the December 2024 meeting, where we gave an update on the black bear management plan, that was an update and not rule changes or recommendations. And so the format in which we bring that is informational. And since it's informational and no action is required from the commissioners in those presentations, we have a standard formatted language that the presentations end on, which is no action is requested at this time, meaning commissioners, we're not asking you to take any votes today, but we would like feedback and guidance moving forward.
So how do we get from regulated hunting to highly regulated hunting? What's the difference?
Yeah, I would say highly is just for when we speak about something like black bears. The hunt approach that was suggested to commissioners this time and was used in the past is one that is very conservative compared to other species. And so typically when you hear us, it really isn't a set definition of terms, but to give the kind of lingo, when you hear me say highly regulated versus regulated hunting, we think of just hunting in general, a species that folks think of deer, turkey, squirrels, quail, all of these things. And generally throughout the United States, bears is included. And, by rule here in Florida, they're a game mammal, and they've been established that way for quite some time.
On May 21st, during the public hearing, there were people who said, wait a minute, those rules were not followed in 2015. True or false?
Yeah, so, when you look across the 2015 hunt, rules were widely followed. I would have to go look and get the data in front of me to see how many. I believe there was a few, very small number of bears that didn't meet that legal criteria. And we see that in some hunts. So was it a bear that was, 86 pounds instead of the minimum 100? I would have to get that data to bring to you. I know it's very, very small number that would have met any type of infraction in the law. When we looked at improvements from the 2015 hunt, where can we do things a little bit differently this time? One of those was the longer season, allowing only a select number of hunters first to have access to the hunt, whereas in 2015 we had allowed a lot of people to have access to the hunt. You could buy a permit and participate.
People came from other states to kill a bear.
That's right, yeah. So we had broad participation, and what had happened was the hunt was going to stop once we met the quota, rather than what we're proposing now, which is start with a set quota. That's all that's going to be distributed. What we believe happened then is it caused people to put a little bit of a rush. And so if I don't harvest my bear today, it might close tomorrow. And in doing so,
that's what I heard.
Yeah, and so in doing so, somebody might feel rushed. And so it really leads back into the feeding station situation. How can we create an environment where a hunter has ample time to assess the situation and make a decision? Because size can be very tough if a bear is alone and they're not near something that you can actually compare the size. This can be very difficult. So those are some of the changes we made.
I've interviewed some people. I saw them in the hearing saying, in 2015, we went to the check stations. We saw 40% of the dead bears were lactating females. We even saw some that were still lactating with cubs still suckling on them.
Sure. There's a lot of misinformation on this topic. And so, the goal of the hunt is, and what is currently approved by commissioners in draft format, meets what's in the rule now, which is that we don't want folks harvesting cubs. So the bears need to be 100 pounds or over. And we don't want or would like people to avoid harvesting sows with cubs. And so it's very important when we're addressing cub survival. So that's kind of what we're all talking about here when we think about a lactating female, right? The concern isn't that we have a female that's lactating. It's that, is she supporting a cub?
Right.
And that's a very important thing to make sure we're addressing. So to start with, to have a sow that is lactating doesn't mean we have a cub that's dependent on that sow. And so this is where we can get into the really strong data and great science that surrounds this topic. So it's important for us to know, when can that cub survive on its own? Over 30 pounds and after August 1st.
Using dogs.
Sure.
That can be a pretty awful way to go, from what I've been told.
So hunting with hounds is something that, no matter what, has a lot of, once again, no matter the species, it gets a lot of attention across the United States. In the Southeast in particular, it's long since been an ethical practice used by hunters. These fair chase principles started becoming incorporated in law, and they're a really major tenet of the North American model of wildlife conservation, which is used across the entirety of North America. It's very successful. And so hounds have long been one of those allowable fair chase methods. And so when it looks like what's fair chase in its simplicity, is the ability for game species to have reasonable opportunity to escape, right? Meaning it's not confined for the hunter to take. And so hounds meet that. Most game species, whether they're deer or bear or other, are going to evade the chase of dogs. Now, dog hunting or use of hounds can be very effective in hunting animals like bears. And so once again, the staff recommendation included it this time from looking at if the use of hounds has a negative impact on bears, and we have no proof, no data shows that would be a negative impact on bears. But when we look at the harvest, it once again allows a hunter to be conservative in their approach and know exactly what they're harvesting, not a rush.
That was George Warthen with the FWC. So, Margie, now we wait for the final meeting of the commission.
Exactly. That happens in August. Assuming the FWC approves the hunt, a drawing will determine who gets one of 187 permits. The application costs $5. Then those who get the permits will pay $100 for in-state residents and $300 for those who live out of state.
Will an unlimited number of applications for the drawing be allowed?
Yes, and there's a twist here. Advocates are encouraging opponents of the hunt to apply for and hopefully get as many permits as possible.
Oh, that would be an interesting turn. So I assume that those who get the permits are not required to kill a bear?
I don't think so, not that I can tell.
Okay, WFSU's Margie Menzel, thank you so much for your excellent coverage of this story.
Thank you so much, Gina.
And we will have much more about the bear hunt on WFSU. I'm Gina Jordan.